So, good evening. Welcome to the panel discussion of Giving Women on the topic of the power of media to change lives and vulnerable women and girls. My name is Noemi Nagy, and as the initiator of this event, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to open this panel discussion on behalf of Giving Women. For those of you who joined a Giving Women event for the first time, let me shortly introduce our organization to you. So we are a membership organization based in Geneva and Zurich. We are a community of women with diverse professional backgrounds. Our mission is to address the needs of women and girls in the most underdeveloped communities. We follow our missions through supporting women-focused organizations and projects worldwide. And we do it in a unique way. Instead of providing financial support, we offer our knowledge or expertise and experiences and advice on strategic development to help organizations to be more efficient and impactful. We also create awareness of gender-related issues by organizing panel discussions, film screenings, and other types of events. These events address the most pressing topics women and girls face around the world, and also highlight different programs of organization that work on solving those problems. Finally, we provide an educational program for our members to build skills and knowledge that is required to engage in more efficient philanthropy. Tonight, we are going to talk about how media can affect the lives of vulnerable women and girls. Media is power. We experience it every day, especially if you look at our children. It has an enormous influence on what we believe, how we behave, and what stereotypes we follow. And these stereotypes can be root causes of gender inequality. And they can have a strong effect on the lives and also on the leadership ambitions of girls and young women. However, on the other side, media can be a powerful tool to educate, inspire, and also connect girls, and also to spread their voice and share their stories about their challenges, difficulties they face, and also about successes and triumphs. Giving Women has invited a panel of experts from philanthropic foundations, NGOs, and representatives of media companies. Tonight, we would like to talk about how these organizations address gender inequality through media, also to hear about the impact of their programs and about successful media initiatives. I'm pleased to introduce you our moderator, Katerina Samara-Vikrama, Director of Issues Affecting Women Programs at Oak Foundation, and a warm welcome to our wonderful panelists. Ladies, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to this panel discussion. We really appreciate your contribution to the topic. And before I hand it over to Katerina, just a short reminder that we will taking your questions at the end of the discussion. So please use the Q&A section and share your comments and remarks. And now over to you, Katerina. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I'm super excited to be here this evening. Some of you will know that I've been at a few Giving Women events, and these are part of some of the highlights of my year. And I've met some great organizations that Oak now works with through that connection. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to start with a confession. Naomi said you've got a panel of experts. The panel are experts on technology. The facilitator is not. I am a terrible Luddite, and I was one of those people who 25 years ago, when email was introduced into our office, said, "This will never work. People should just get up out of their desk and go down the hall and talk to people. What's the email going to add?" So I recognize that with the help of my children, and I mean, mentioned our children, dragged me into the 21st century, and I'm very grateful to be here now, especially as a lot of the work that I'm working on, I'm working with partners that are deliberately working to empower women and girls. And we know that information is power. And women and girls are disproportionately affected by information inequality. And women and girls who have multiple barriers to equal participation in society are often even doubly, triply impacted by their lack of access to information and knowledge. And we know that media in its multiple forms, and that's what we're going to hear about today, media covers so many ways of communication. It's a powerful device which is constantly evolving and advancing to bring information. And that's one of the things I find absolutely hilarious when my kids start to talk about, well, the TikTok generation just did blah. And I'm thinking, I barely got onto Instagram like 6 months ago. So it moves really fast, and keeping up with it and being able to use it to advantage women and girls who would otherwise not have access to information is a huge skill that Heidi, Rana and Sharon have in spades and are going to bring and share with us this evening. So we're really grateful to them for that, because their work is enabling more information, greater data, debate and entertainment, which is also a mechanism for information sharing, to get into the homes and communities of women who and girls who might not otherwise access that information. So I mentioned them tonight. We're really lucky to be joined by this group of women who work on new ways of communicating and new ways of using technology to address gender inequality. Each of them has found a path that is extraordinarily creative and different and takes up technology in ways that others of us haven't really thought about. So it's really exciting to have that much creative energy in the virtual room with us. So Heidi Barsh-Harrod is the Executive Director of Women's Voices Now in the USA. Sharon Beilinger is the founder of Media Matters for Women, which works in Sierra Leone and DRC. And Rana Askul is the Chief Executive Officer of Womanity Foundation. You're in Dubai, right?
Yep.
In Dubai, yeah. But I'm not going to read out their bios. You have them. You can read them at your leisure. And probably some of you are going to go away and Google everybody. Still astonished by that. But before we start, Rana shared with us a really great, powerful clip that illustrates the use of social media, short videos, to raise really crucial and sometimes taboo issues in communities that would otherwise really shy away from talking about those subjects. So we're going to start by sharing that, and I'm going to let Kathleen, you're managing the technology.
Yeah. I don't know, Rana, if you want to introduce it in any way.
I'll say a couple of words really quickly. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone first. But yeah, very, very quickly on the clip. It is basically the culmination of our efforts over the last year and a half to produce fresh content that really taps into what young people love to engage with online. The whole purpose of bringing this format, I think where really the innovation is in the format, is to bring format that will actually be consumed by your average man, woman walking down the street in the MENA region. They might not all agree with the messaging, but that's kind of our job to push it forward. It's a series, it's a satire YouTube-based series, 10 episodes. We tackle issues from the value of woman to masculinity to honor. It is extremely bold by MENA measures. So I think watch it with that kind of perspective on it. But I think we're sharing the first episode, which is the episode about the value of women in the region. So I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so I'm going to be sharing this, and this is usually the part that technically we hope goes smoothly. Now, we are streaming it from my computer here, but given this time slot around 6 p.m. is quite a heavy time slot on the internet, so I hope that for all of you that this will stream quite fluidly and that you'll be able to watch this about 5 minutes long. But afterwards, I will put the YouTube link in the chat box in case any of you are not able to see it very well and then want to join us in 5 minutes time. So here goes. So I just have to go and find it now. So.
oops.
بعرف انه ما بتتصدق، بس تبين انه النساء لهم نفس الفترة الزمنية على الكرة الارضية، زيهم زي الرجال. هاي لوسي، عمر هيكلها 3 مليون سنة، بس ليش يا هل ترى اغلبية الرجال بيتصرفوا كأنه الكوكب لإلهم والنساء جايين ضيوف؟ ليش؟ ومع انه اقدم هياكل عظميا وجدوا كانوا للنساء، ما في ولا صورة بتورجي تطور الانسان من جنس الانثى، فقررت اعمل وحدة. كل نوع حيوان بالطبيعة في ذكر وانثى مثل بعض الا الانسان، فمجتمعاتنا على مدى العصور اعتبرت انه الذكر هو القاعدة والانثى هي الاستثناء. ارسطو يلي كتير تعب لنولد ذكر قال انه المرأة ادنى من الرجل بس اعلى من العبيد، وانه الرجل هو المخلوق الكامل. بس افضل نوع امرأة هي اللي بتسمع الكلمة زيها زي العبيد. جولي جولي هي فعليا لعبة حظ بالاخر. انت عندك 50-50 chance، يا بتنولدي انسان او بتنولدي بنت. والموضوع بيعتمد على الحقبة الزمنية والمنطقة يلي بتختاري تنولدي فيها. بس عن جد كان حظك ممكن يكون أسوأ. تخيلي لو انولدتي بالمنطقة العربية أيام الجاهلية، كانوا بعض قبائل العرب بيلجأوا لوأد البنات، وكان القرار بيرجع للأب. يا بيدفنوكي بالحفرة جنب أمك أول ما تتولدي وبيخلصوا منك، يا إما بيعطوكي فرصة لكانوا دبروا بيعتك وزوجوكي. إلا إذا بهالفترة صار في غزو على قبيلتك، ساعتها أبوكي بيرجع بيطمك بهالحفرة وإنتي عايشة، حفاظاً على شرف القبيلة يلي بتمثليه إنتي كامرأة. يعني هذا كله عشانك، أحسن من ما تغتصبي. فعل نسوي مع المرأة وليس ضدها. هاي الممارسات توقفت مع مجيء الإسلام، بس هذا الكره ضل موجود اجتماعياً وأخذ أشكال تانية كمان: جرائم الشرف، زواج القاصرات، ختان البنات، التحرش الجنسي، العنف الأسري، تفاوت بالأجور، قوانين الأحوال المدنية الظالمة من طلاق، حضانة، ميراث، زواج. هدول كلهم بينطلقوا من نفس المبدأ، إنه أنتي بحاجة لولي أمر دايما، وعورة، وبمعظم الأحيان مشيئة، تنشري وبتنباعي، يعني خالصين السمر. شجرة ورقتها بعطيك إياها كفالة 5 سنين. وعلى قولة تشارلز داروين، المرأة كشريك أحسن من الكلب. تعي نعمل حاجات منتل. الحضارة صار لها مبلشة 7500 سنة، إذا اعتبرنا هال 7500 سنة ساعة يعني 3600 ثانية، معناته إنه المرأة تقريباً صار لها 30 ثانية عم تعتبر إنسان. فكانت أول مبادرة بسوريا عام 1953 لما أخذوا النساء حقهم بالتصويت بلا قيود. والطبيعي اليوم نسأل ليش كل هالتمييز؟ عادات، تقاليد، شرف، عرض، عيلة، دخلة، ثمر، البادية، الخيمة، العشيرة، الناقة، الجمل. فبنظر أغلب القوانين العربية المرأة بتضل قاصر طول حياتها. عشان هيك في ناس ما بيلاقوا إنه زواج القاصرات إشي غلط. فبما انك مخلوق ناقص وصار بدك تتزوجي، فانت بحاجة لوصاية من شي زلمة، ابوكي، اخوكي، عمك، خالك، جدك، ابنك. وبحال ما توفر حدا فيهم تقدري تستعيني بصديق، وبهالحالة القاضي بيصير وصي عليكي، تقدري تناديني عمو. بس المهم مش انت تتهوري وتاخدي قرارك لحالك. المرأة هي الام، هي الزوجة، هي الاخت والصديق. كلنا بنعرف انه بالعالم العربي المرأة ما بتساوي الرجل، بس قديش بتساوي يا هل؟ شهادة المرأة بتساوي نصف الرجل، وبالميراث بأسوأ الحالات المرأة بيطلع لها 8، وطول ما الرجل بيطلع له 4 زوجات، انتي بالكابل تبعكم، مش بالكابل، بالكوادروبل تبعكم،
ما صاروا 5 يا مريم،
بجروب الزوجات تبعكم انت بتساوي ربع رجل طالما كل وحدة بيطلع لها ربع. فبس بناء على هدول المعطيات اللي عنا اياها بيطلع لنا انه المرأة بتساوي 0.29 من الرجل. وإذا قالت لك أمك مرة تانية حافظي على قيمتك انقضي عليها بهاي المعلومات. وبحال إن سألتوا من وين سمعتوا هالقصص قولوا إنكم سمعتوها مني. بس عشان ما نكون هالقد سلبيين تعالوا ما ننسى إنه إحنا دخلنا بموسوعة جينيس بأكبر فسيفساء معمولة من شمع بالعالم، مش بالمنطقة، بالعالم.
Great, thank you. That was very entertaining. I really love that woman. Her name's Maria, right?
Yeah.
The right runner? Yeah, I love her. I think she's hilarious. I actually brought in my funny hat and glasses to work because I felt like it was so cool that I was feeling very uncool while I was, sitting there. So I might do some of it dressed like her just to keep paying attention. Actually, I can't because my eyes aren't that good. Anyway, so Maria mentioned that in the Arab world, women aren't equal to men, and quite frankly, I'm still looking for the places where they truly are equal to men or treated equally and their rights are equally respected. And we know that one of the mechanisms in which we see constantly inequality being replicated is in the mainstream media. And Heidi's organization is really working to combat that. So I wondered, Heidi, if you could set the scene for us and just describe some of the challenges that are created by the current mainstream media systems.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So jumping right in, today, what we know is that still the majority of the people behind the camera and in front of the camera are men of a certain demographic and a certain age range, and they're making this decisions on what kind of media that we see. And that's no matter where we are all over the world. And it is not for a lack of talented women content creators. It is just because that's how the way things have been and that's the way things are. And in order to challenge the gender-based stereotypes that we see on the screen and therefore off the screen, we need to be doing what we can to put more women and girls behind and in front of the camera. It basically comes down to that. Because I think something we've learned is that in the 25 years since the Beijing Platform for Action in 1995, there have been an explosion of women's rights legislation, increased access to education, economic opportunities, initiatives. We had an explosion of women's rights and women participation in the Arab uprisings. We've had the viral Me Too movement since 2017. And that very event indicated and showed us how, while we have all these advances in laws and opportunities, economic and educational, in our blood and in our bones, we do not see or treat women and girls as equal. And that doesn't matter what gender you are. It's a bias held by us all. And since media is pervasive all over the world, and of course to different extents based on what geographic area you are, it is really the untapped tool that can catalyze so much of the hard work that has been done by international organizations and domestic entities and so on and so forth. So if we want to achieve real sustainable gender equality, we need to step up our efforts to consume media where women and girls are behind in front of the camera, and to make sure it's getting produced at the proportional levels to the rest of the media that is created mostly by, I have to be general, by men. So yes.
Thanks. So what do you think are some of the ways that organizations like yours and others that are represented here today are doing to create that change? What's the work that they're doing, for example, in your organization?
So for our organization, for example, we have 3 pillars where we are promoting, producing, and sharing women-created content. So in our film festival, we're seeking primarily women and identifying filmmakers who are making films that are focusing on women's and girls' issues. And it's not just the hardship, it's also the victories and the progress that's being made, because another issue with when women aren't creating, producing, and sharing their own stories is that sometimes we're seeing portrayals of women and girls sort of in aspic, it's paused. It's not reflective of what women and girls are living and breathing and doing every day. So you'll see, constant stories of women as victims, where that's really not ever the case. There's always a more complex issue to be unpacked. Another way is to literally give opportunities to women to make films. So we have a girls program called Girls Voices Now, where we teach young women in underrepresented areas of Los Angeles how to make social change documentaries, and then how to use those documentaries to make small campaigns to influence their community. So training young women how to make films. And then the sharing, which is that, again, it's about the content that we consume. It's not for a lack of content. There's an overabundance of content, but how can we curate content that is really showing women and girls in their full complexities, their full age ranges, their full stages of life, where they are, again, like having triumphs or still struggling, women speaking to each other, sharing each other's stories, hearing from women in the same space and time, so you don't feel alone, like all these kinds of things. The more content that we have that is promoting women's and girls' voices, the more opportunities we really have to see the true picture of women and girls in the world. And we won't find that in mainstream media. You really have to still work to go find that, even with everything that has happened since the viral Me Too movement that really has touched all corners of the globe, as far as I have read.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Thank you. Rana, Heidi's just talked a bit about film. And when we spoke earlier, you were talking to me about the use of social media, which is another form of media that's pervasive and that gets really into people's homes. But it's a relatively new tool. But it's a powerful tool for giving voice to women and girls, especially in restrictive environments. So can you tell us how young women are using social media to talk about taboo issues? Maria really raised some taboos when she spoke, and she also talked about this. You talked in your introduction about this idea of they're not always issues that men and women, people on the street, agree with. So I'm interested to hear some examples about how your partners in the Middle East, women and girls, are using social media as a tool to advance their agenda in the Middle East, while recognizing it may not be welcome by people on the street.
Absolutely. I'd love to address that. I actually just wanted to also make a quick point to Heidi's earlier kind of context, building around how mainstream media is impacting the status quo and what we see. And your talk about, obviously, representation. We don't see enough representation of women. We don't see enough diversity in the roles that women occupy, which truly reflects what they do, in life. I think while it is 100% absolutely true as well for MENA, I just wanted to highlight that it is even more complex at a MENA level, where actually it is not only the lack of representation and roles, because that is severely lacking. So our ratios, if you look at journalists, are about 5 men journalists to 1 woman journalist, which is quite high. So obviously that representation, that reporting from a gender lens is sorely there's a huge gap there. But I would like to add as well that we have 2 other main issues that we battle with in MENA. First is the lack of data. So we don't have enough research to help us understand to what extent is this really bad? Like what are we up against from a numbers perspective, from a volume perspective? But with the numbers that we do have, which kind of at the moment date back to about 7 or 8 years ago. So we're talking about 7 or 8 year old research. So we do take this number from that lens, but we know that actually across 24 studies that were conducted in the Arab world around the representation of women in media had pointed out that 80%, so that's 80% of the images of Arab women in Arab media are actually negative. So they are not necessarily just stereotypical where, they're represented as, household. No, they're actually negative. And to pinpoint exactly what these were, portrayed as sexual commodities was number 1, portrayed as immoral, portrayed as illiterate, portrayed as inexperienced, as materialistic, as weak and dependent. So this was 7, 8, let's say 10 years ago. I'm thinking 80%, okay, maybe things have gotten a bit better. I'm willing to give another 10%, but that's still 70% of negative images. So the onus is now on us to not only shift how people kind of label or box them in your more traditional, stereotypical, there's obviously, misrepresentation and roles and all of that, but we actually have to combat an almost negative mindset that puts women behind the zero starting line. So we're actually starting from the negative. So that's quite, that's quite kind of an understanding that we have. Now, having said that, to go back to your question, Katerina, on social media and how women in the region are using social media. So, and you mentioned something that is really critical. We obviously know that the lack of press freedom in the Middle East not only limits the kind of the information that people regardless in the Middle East receive, but it also obviously stops that functionalism of mass media in its more analytical and interpretive role. So there's no, there's no really, mass media does not provide that. It is capped, in the Middle East. Now, obviously the Arab Spring came and shifted that completely. What the Arab Spring actually woke women up to in MENA is that social media can be used not only to access alternative narratives and interpretive narrative of the news and more analytical perspectives, but it also helped them understand that it is a place where they are able to talk, engage in discussions, and organize. And then that really shifted how social media is being perceived and was being perceived by women activists specifically in the region and women organizations to really push the agenda forward. I'll mention two, because obviously there are so many, so many examples of how women in the region use social media, but I'll mention two particularly, more recent and to me more critical. One is the active use of these organizations and these groups, the active use of social media to create change. And the most recent example is the rise of the Me Too Egyptian movement, which happened in July this year because of an Instagram account that broke the news on a 2014 gang rape case that had went unreported because they were able to provide, and this was run by Egyptian Me Too activists, where they could get into the Instagram platform and report anonymously incidents of rape. And so this was a high profile case from 2014 that basically had this, groundswell, in terms of the reaction to it, that forced the government to actually, in a conservative society like Egypt, where a lot of this is usually brushed under the rug, but it actually forced the authorities to take action instead of ignore what has been reported. Now, obviously, it's not all, a positive story, because what ended up happening is that some of the witnesses that were encouraged to come forward were clamped down upon. So there's also a reprisal back to the actions. But what we see today is that the movement has not ceased. So although there was intimidation of the original account and potentially some reported arrests of the original account that broke the story, there are now other accounts that are continuously reporting on the case, continuously reporting on what is happening. So there is this movement that is very much here to stay, no matter what the obstacles are. A very other story I will quote, and I think for me this was really the way that, although this was not an active use of social media by a movement, it was more on the capacity of media to report on what is happening and give voice to women, to reflect what's happening on the ground, was what happened in 2019 in the Sudan, uprising that was primarily women and youth led. And I don't know whether you recall, but there was this, I believe, 19, 20-year-old student activist, Ala Salah, who basically led a lot of the protests and ended up getting on a car, chanting, music, poetry, leading really the masses. And it was phenomenally caught on in terms of
the media reported it, but then it went, it went really across. And I think it was the message. There was this entire narrative that was born on the back of that. They started referring to Ala Salah as a kandaka, which is a term that is used to refer to Nubian queens, to bring back the narrative and the legacy of strong women in Africa taking charge, taking lead. And she ended up going to the UN Assembly talking about political participation of women and how important it is to have women on the table to discuss the future of Sudan. And so for me, that's where we have kind of two examples of either a direct use of organizations, movements, and activists in the region to really push the message forward, and a more, what happens when a more balanced approach to news reporting takes place, where you're able to actually spotlight, fantastic stories and really kind of, emotionally charged, strong, reflection of what's happening on the ground.
Thanks, Rana. So those are brilliant examples really of how film and social media are being harnessed by women and girls, youth activists, to bring about exactly the kind of change, quite dramatic. In the Sudanese example is hugely dramatic, but in ways that get into people's homes and that they can relate to. So I want to go to Sharon now, because both of the programs you've spoken about, Heidi and Rana, rely quite heavily on quite advanced forms of technology. I mean, to someone like me, they're hugely advanced. But lots of countries we work in, many of you will be working in places where you know that access to those kinds of technology is really limited. It's really only a very small portion of society that can access computers, films, and so forth. So Sharon, you're working with communities that don't really access television, film, social media quite to the extent that these communities Heidi and Rana are working with. Can you talk to us a little bit about how technology can reach women and girls who live really in the most remote communities in the globe and help them to get crucial information to help create change or to protect themselves, information that they need to empower themselves? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Thanks. I'm really happy to be here. And I really like having the tech question, because that's really the business of Media Matters for Women, connecting last mile women and girls, those who are without Wi-Fi or have any income for telecom connections, and for many live beyond the reach of roads and electricity. That's our client group. Those are the people that we're interested in helping connect to the information age. And fortunately, we have two things in our favor in trying to work through this problem of technology and reaching last mile women and girls. And the first one is the Sustainable Development Goal number 5B, which advocates for using enhanced technology to empower women and girls. And I mention that because it really does indicate that there's a world understanding that there's a digital divide, and not only a digital divide, but that there's a gender divide within that. The second thing that's working in our favor, we're focused in Africa at the moment, as Katrina mentioned, Sierra Leone and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And what's really working in our favor is that Africa is brilliant at leapfrogging technology and repurposing technology in ways that make it affordable and usable in their contexts. So that's pretty much what we do. We utilize those two technologies that Africa has leapfrogged forward with most recently. And those are, of course, mobile phones and solar. And we've decided that there's a way to leapfrog radio, which I'm sure many of you understand is enormously expensive. It's very energy intensive, and it's really not that appropriate for Africa. It very rarely can reach everyone, particularly women and girls who are in the most remote areas. So we have taken on the idea and created many pilot projects and have proven the concept that you can use mobile phones and solar rechargers to create networks that are viable and efficient and interesting for women and girls in rural communities. So now I'm going to get a little techie because when people hear about Media Matters for Women and what we're doing, we've been around for 10 years. The question is always, how do you do this without Wi-Fi or electricity? And it really, just how does it work? And let me put it into two contexts. We do both production and distribution. So on the production side, we have created what's called a mobile production unit, which is like a sound studio in a suitcase. And it's small consumer electronics that can be solar generated, solar powered. And we enable our journalists. We're really a journalist-based organization, professional female journalists who are located in kind of medium-sized towns outside the capital, who service the rural areas in their province. And with a mobile production unit, they can make studio quality podcasts without a studio. One little trick I'll share is that they use their cars or someone's car because it's a quiet place and they can make recordings there. They go out and they interview experts on a subject. They interview people on the street, and then they can mix the podcast in a quiet place. So that's the production side with our team of journalists. And on the distribution side, this is what really usually boggles people's minds. And that is, we use a repurposed Bluetooth in a kind of a different way than all of us use Bluetooth, but it's on pretty much every phone now sold in Africa. It's a standard feature on every handset. And you can make a crystal clear transfer of a short audio file by standing close to someone. And it's free and it's fast. Africans use it quite a bit for music sharing. And what we have become basically is there's kind of a nice way of terming us as the Bluetooth ladies, because in the rural areas, this is really a free way of exchanging short podcasts. So what we do is create original programming in three ways. We create short, interesting, informative, professional podcasts of about 10 minutes, and we distribute those. And then we also do short public service announcements, particularly during the COVID era. And then the third kind of content that we really excel at is a drama series. And what we found is that through the peer-to-peer and using a number of other distribution methods like community radio and WhatsApp, we can reach those communities that we target in our journalist area. So what we are achieving basically is a way to build women's networks so that women can be informed of their rights, of many topics that influence their lives. They can laugh together, they can share information, they can learn and be part of a movement which starts in their village and then extends beyond their region to their country. And that's kind of the approach of MMW. And we see ourselves basically as media development practitioners who found a way to bring remote women and girls into the information age. And we've created what we consider a frugal media. It's appropriate and relevant to the needs of those women and girls who really are without good links to information sources.
Great, thank you. So you've all talked about giving girls and women voice, whether it's the voice of youth, we saw Maria, whether we're talking about female journalists who are developing the content, recognizing what women out there want, and then developing content and getting it out to them, whether it's getting more women behind the camera, in front of the camera, making the decisions about content. And that's kind of like the first step, right? Getting the voice, which is, I think, also a goal in itself. And even if we stop there, for me, that's already a huge leap forward. But you have been kind of taking it even further than that. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more about, you know, when women or young women and women are able to find their voice and use that voice, when it's amplified, what kind of movements are growing up around those groups? What kind of changes are we seeing? And I'm going to start with you this time, Sharon.
Well, one of our most popular shows, which has created the most trust, I think you could say, in the rural communities where we work, is called Mamie and Omo. And the design is great. It began when UN Radio came into Sierra Leone. I'm talking about Sierra Leone, right after the war. And its premise is that it's two women that are friends, and they meet over the fence in the evening at 5 o'clock, and they have a short conversation of about 5 minutes. One's a market woman. She sells in the local market, and the other has a salary job. She's a teacher. So Mamie and Omo have the most amazing conversations, and it's a fictional premise, but the actresses are professional journalists who work with us. And we've been able to create a lot of trust through that. And the kind of movement that we've created is that they hear a familiar voice, they listen to arguments about really key issues, and they hear their own opinion, but they also hear the opinion of somebody else in a very fun way and entertaining way. And they can relate to one or the other, and they do. And we have a lot of feedback loops for our distribution channels, and so we hear a lot back on this. And they take up issues of the day that are very serious and some very light. But at the basis of it, we've created a way for women to come together and talk about what Mamie and Omo are talking about. They trust the voices. They see them as kind of personal friends. We had someone write in that wanted a text message saying that they wanted to meet Mamie. And I think that the movement that we've created is that women can hear about things that are very important to them in a way that interests them a lot and interests people around their husbands and sons and others. And it creates an opening for not only just women's voices, but for women's issues to be taken seriously and to be seen in just a different way. So we create change, I think, by opening a space that didn't exist before.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Heidi, building on that, your film work's been a really strong tool that groups have used for campaigning as well. So how can you give us a couple examples of how communities come together around specific campaigns using film as a way of amplifying that?
I would love to. So as I mentioned earlier, one of our programs is an international film festival where we're accepting films from all over the world that are bringing up women's and girls' rights issues from everywhere. And one film that came through our festival, the title was Handful of Ash, and it was about female genital mutilation in Iraqi Kurdistan. And the background on this film is that when the US invaded Iraq and all the chaos that ensued, there was much need for medical assistance, especially in the far-reaching villages of Iraqi Kurdistan and northern Iraq. And there were international organizations, but also local Kurds who were helping the communities, whether it was giving birth to children or first aid or nutrition, whatever their needs were, their medical needs and basic needs. And as they were going from village to village, they were hearing lots of stories about the complications that would result from female genital mutilation in these villages. And there was a similar thread that it was a practice that is done because it is what is done, and you're not supposed to question it. But marital relations were complicated. Young girls were dying from unhygienic practices with knives. It was causing a lot of suffering. And so these members of Kurdish communities decided to make a short documentary to sort of reflect what this practice was doing to the society, to the communities, to the villages. And so they started interviewing women and men and young women and even local village imams to challenge the practice and to show that this isn't something, we have a choice to continue this or not. It's on us to decide. Let's take in all the information, the pros and cons of the practice, and then decide what we're going to do moving forward. And that once that documentary was made, it was taken from village to village, villages without electricity. They would bring a generator, they'd find a wall, they would project it on the screen, they'd show the film, and then there would be a community discussion following it. And what this film was known for doing is that after it traveled through several villages, there would be village meetings and they would decide to stop the practice in the community. And they became, zero tolerance FGM in these villages. And quite often there would also be some incentives like, let's work toward this goal, and then this international organization is going to help us put a well that's accessible so we have clean water. And so making the deal sweeter, if you will, because it is very challenging to stop cultural practices that have been going on for a long time. And again, the power was that it wasn't coming from the outside. It was members of Kurdish society bringing this information to other members of Kurdish society, saying, let's have a moment to reflect on our practices. How is it helping or harming us as community members? And then decide what to move forward. So that there are 0 FGM villages in parts of Iraqi Kurdistan is very much because of that film, Handful of Ash, which can be viewed in the Women's Voices Now film archive if you're interested in watching that film and how it was presented. And another example, we work with a Bangladeshi filmmaker. She lives in the capital. She's a medical doctor, but she's also an environmental activist, a child activist. And she saw online on Facebook that we were doing an event. This is back in 2013, I think, or even 2012. We were doing an event at the University of Southern California. I was working with a Pakistani American student who was an artist, and she wanted to raise the issue of acid violence in South Asia. She comes from Pakistan. It was an issue that really upset her to know that women would be punished with having acid thrown on them for being disobedient wives, or not following through with an arranged marriage, or quite often by a mother-in-law who didn't approve of her daughter-in-law, all the reasons that acid violence will happen. And she decided to start an art exhibition on that. So we did an event at USC. This woman in Bangladesh saw that we were doing this event and saw what we put online, which was the artworks, and she decided, I need to make a film on acid violence in Bangladesh. This is an issue that we don't talk about. And she had a friend who had recently become a victim of acid violence, or survivor of acid violence. At Talenti, we speak in terms of survivors, and this woman was definitely a survivor. So she decided to make this short documentary about acid violence. And because it was such a taboo issue, she had so many challenges in actually making the film. And people even at the Acid Survivor Foundation in Dhaka wouldn't speak to her because they were afraid of retaliation, or there's just not something that we talk about. Yes, we know it happens. Yes, we treat the survivors. But she made it anyway. We were able to help her get a small grant from another US foundation to get it up and running. She submitted this film to our festival, to other festivals in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and it was actually met with great acclaim, and she received many accolades. And because of the attention and positive feedback it got from Indonesia and the Philippines, the Bangladeshi Women's Film Society got wind of it and recognized her for her bravery and for the documentary that she made. And then after all of that buzz around this very important documentary that she made that wasn't really being talked about, then she was able to go back to the Acid Survivor Foundation, for example, and survivors were willing to speak to her and tell her story. And she was able to rework the documentary, so it was even a more stronger piece of media to then share and bring up this issue. So, I mean, it's the power of one film and it being presented in the right way and sort of given permission to be spoken about and accepted by the community. And then it really can change so much and open up the space for conversations that you wouldn't be able to have otherwise, and things that you would never think could change, as though culture is static, because that's how I think with many women's rights issues, that's how it's presented. This is how things are done, this is how they will always be done. And these films really challenge that status quo in a very powerful way.
I'm going to throw in a question that you aren't expecting, because a couple of you have raised something. It's dangerous work.
Yes.
Producing content that breaks taboos is dangerous work. Rana, can I go to you quickly? How are those women protected, especially young women? How are they kept safe when they're doing that kind of work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the issue of safety was one of the first things we thought about when we knew the direction of the kind of the show and what topics we are going to we're going to talk about. Just to put things into perspective, and this is more of a personal story, but you would all know how dangerous it is to be talking about the stuff in MENA. So I'm a writer as well, and so about a few years back, I wrote this article with one of the mainstream newspapers in the region, English-speaking newspaper, and it was an article about women and women's rights, and there was references to how things are today versus how things were a few years back. And I had a writer's Facebook page account at the time where I would put and post in my my articles under my name. And I remember my first experience with getting hate comments that had pictures of beheaded women from ISIS-linked accounts at the time. So it is quite a real, in a sense, it's not real. You have to understand where your kind of where your safety boundaries are and whether the threats are real or not. But one of the first things that we immediately started thinking about when we knew that Maria would come out and actually address some of these topics and talk about these topics, we made sure that we don't tackle at all two critical things. So we don't talk religion and we don't talk politics. So that was a very clear, and we really had to, because a lot of the issues that we're presenting are intertwined with religious culture, religious context, political context, but we had to literally revise the scripts over and over again to make sure that minimally we are making sure there is no references to those to be able to be safe from that perspective. Now, the other 2 points actually was where Maria was based. So Maria is based in Beirut. Beirut would have within the MENA region a higher ceiling of what you are able to talk about and what you're able to present and what are you able to tackle in terms of topics. So she was safe from that perspective in being located in a place like Beirut. So for example, we'd never do that to a young woman of Maria's age that is out in Baghdad or that is out in, really for that matter, potentially Egypt or right. So we were very focused on making sure that her location guaranteed a certain amount of editorial freedom for her to voice, some of these issues. Plus, it's not only that, we actually, made sure that Maria, who is actually Jordanian originally, so not from Lebanon, had quite, had her family's full support back in Jordan. And what I mean by family is really the wider family. So not just the nuclear family, but more of a wider base that would be able to literally have her back. And so one of the first comments when the episode 1 was released was Maria's mom. The second comment was Maria's dad, saying that super proud of you, super proud of the, kind of the work that you're doing. And literally we had a lot of comments from relatives, from uncles, from aunts. So they were at the forefront. And this was something that we intentionally, had to create and had to make sure that these discussions are happening and that she is comfortable and safe in that, kind of having a backup network for her back in a more conservative Jordan as opposed to a more kind of liberal Beirut-based scenario.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, we're so interesting and we're getting, close to time. and I can see we're actually at time when we should start questions. Atalanti, do you mind if I just ask one more question? Is it okay if I do that of everyone?
Yeah, because we haven't got a lot of questions in the chat. So if people have questions, they can put them in the chat, or else when we stop, then we'll put the hands up. Okay.
Okay, great. So you've just mentioned something that's really crucial around how to keep you secure and how Maria's kept secure. What we really also know is doesn't really matter where you are located. If you're a youth activist, you're in danger. Greta Thunberg lives in Sweden. She is the most wanted, the most threatened Swede in the world. She has more security than the King and Queen of Sweden or the Prime Minister of Sweden. For what? When you look at it, like, for what? So what's clear to me is that when young people, especially young women, find their voice and start to use that voice for social change, the system, whatever that is, becomes terrified, right? Otherwise, there's no other reason to want to attack a 16-year-old child who's basically saying, save the planet, right? There's no reason to attack a young woman who's got a YouTube channel, which basically at its heart is about let's treat women and men equally. Those things are so basic, and yet the fear generated when young people find their voice and seize it is quite an extraordinary thing, which shows to me they're kind of on the right track, right? If they weren't doing something that was creating change, nobody would care. They'd leave them alone. So I guess my question for you is, we know that adolescent girls as leaders and drivers of change are going to be crucially important to the future. That's what we see today. You talked about Alat, the Sudanese example, Maria, Greta, there's Indigenous land defenders who are teenage girls and so forth. Why is it so important that we give them the leadership and them the voice? And what do you think that's going to create in the next 10 years? Like why is that so important, and where is it going to take us? And I want to start with you, Sharon, because one of the things you didn't talk about was your youth, what are they called? Youth advocates, and the significance that they play in getting the message out. So can I start with you?
Sure. This is really exciting news for us. And it's a giant step forward that we came upon a little bit accidentally. And that is one of the main distribution systems that we used to use is listening centers. So our journalist would create 5 listening centers in different regions, and they would be run by what we call a focal point. And that would be a woman who was running the waiting room in a clinic, or it could be the headmistress of a school. It could be a main place in a market where women gathered. And we were very successful with listening center approach. And recently we were able to pay a small stipend to 2 young women at every listening center who were particularly active with us. Well, then with COVID, of course, we can't encourage large public gatherings, and our listening center approach for distribution ended. So we pivoted and we focused on these youth advocates along with town criers. And yes, there are still town criers in every community.
I love that.
Yeah, it's
something so charming.
which is great. But every community we go into, we start by getting buy-in by the leadership, by the chieftains and everyone who in the leadership. So we're very welcome by the time we start, and now we've been present in these communities for a long time. Well, the youth advocate model turned out to be enormously successful. Our numbers in 3 months, the first 3 months of COVID, shot to over 100,000 direct listeners, 40% of whom were men. These young women are so on fire with the being able to be trained in issues, having a resource, most of whom had never been to Freetown, but they have taken on this new activism role, the new responsibility, the having the voice. And I think that we haven't had any security issues you're talking about with this new change. It's been seen as positive because I think in most of these villages, we are the only information on COVID. We are the entertainment. And it's our programming, which is seen as important. And so while these young women represent change, meaning change, that I think is the reason that we haven't had problems with them taking on this bigger role. About your question concerning what's going to happen in 10 years, what we know is we're giving voice, we're connecting women with one another. You can't have a women's movement unless women can talk to each other. And that's what we're laying the groundwork for. And I think that we've made a lot of progress, and we've really proven the model that we know how to connect women inexpensively in rural areas. The next step, where we need to go next is to move these youth advocates to where they're advocating not just about rights and making their lives better and helping young women women make their lives better, but how can they relate to the institutions that need change? And that is where we have our sights next. That's a bigger step, and that's really asking a lot of these young women and asking a lot of us as an organization. How do you create a women's movement now that women are talking? Is a women's movement that has political clout.
Thanks. Heidi.
Yes, I would love, thank you. So related to this topic, and if we're looking at 10 years from now, in our Girls' Voices Now program, in the research that we've read about the importance of working with girls, is that, and I'm sure many of us know this, that until a certain age, girls perform equally academically and everything to boys. And then something happens around early puberty where their confidence levels just plummet. And that's exactly the moment when so much potential for leadership, so much potential for equal representation is lost because girls fall through the cracks and it's just not addressed. So we know that if we are creating a program that is specifically catering to girls and not only giving them technical skills of filmmaking, but also the whole girl confidence levels, building community with each other, camaraderie between girls who can be so competitive with each other as women are so competitive with each other, tackling some of those obstacles to fulfilling our potential, then in 10 years' time, we will see the numbers level out. Possibly, that's the hope, right? So it's not even that we are trying to make to pump out girls who are going to be women's rights advocates. We're trying to pump out girls who really believe in themselves and don't lose their confidence and don't lose sight of their equality and their capacity to be change makers, to succeed in life in whatever path that they create. So that's why it is just of utmost importance to listen to the voices of youth and to give them the space and the platform, and of course to train them on how to get their message across too. It's not just because they think something, this is what all of us should be doing, that we're giving them the tools to really refine their thoughts, their messages, their plans, their visions for the future, and making sure that they have the support to keep doing that when they're no longer youth, when Greta grows up, and as Malala has been, has a crew of people who are making sure that her message isn't lost and that she moves into adulthood and is as powerful as she is today, and the numerous other young people whose voices are being heard throughout the world.
Before I go to you, Rana, can I ask Yasmin Zanini, do you think Heidi's answer to my question answered your question in the chat?
Hi, everyone. Well, partly, but yeah, I wanted to know if there is any other initiative a little bit more in depth into this. I know that it is a wide topic, and it's very hard to tackle because it's something that impacts women in the virtual world. So it doesn't necessarily so it goes beyond borders. So yeah, I was just wondering if you have any further comments on it.
So Heidi, her question, Yasmin's question was around an example of work you're doing to address how the social media negatively impacts girls, especially in terms of aspiring to look a certain way, be a certain way.
Yes, so in our work, I would say we're very much a conduit. So we're not setting or saying what the content that's produced, promoted, and shared should be. We're collecting, filtering, curating. So I can say that this summer in our youth program, and these films will be made available to the public in a few weeks' time after October 15th. This summer there were 2 girls groups who wanted to talk about hypersexualization of young women and impossible body image standards that they are receiving from social media, from advertisements, from the filters that young women and men put on their pictures and stuff. So I mean, in terms of what Women's Voices Now is going to see in this work is that there are young girls who think that's such an important issue that they're making a short film about that, and we'll do everything we can to push that film out into the world so that there is a conversation and an awareness that not all girls agree that they should be, being hypersexualized in media or hating their images because they don't look like a filter or the photoshopped model in the advertisement for the favorite clothing brand or whatever that is. So our job is to make a channel, a path, a space, and to amplify their voices coming from these young girls that are saying, yeah, this is wrong and this isn't helping us thrive and be the best members of society that we can be. I hope that is something. Yes, you're welcome.
Great. Thank you. Rana, do you just want to go back briefly to the question before about the power of young women's voices and where they're going to take us in the next 10 years?
Absolutely. I think in kind of, and maybe I'll take a step forward in trying to think about what are we up against in the next 10 years and what needs to change from that perspective. I actually was going to say 3 things. I was going to say innovation, go young, and take it mainstream. And when I say innovation, I'm actually talking about how we innovate across formats of content that we are producing, how we innovate across distribution, and how do we innovate when it comes to reach. So these are, for me, the 3 main kind of aspects where a lot of innovation and being ahead of the curve when we talk about media, and in what we produce and how we put it forward and in what ways and where will it reach is kind of all, for me, lumped on the innovation side. The second point, which is go young, goes back to your point on how critical it is for us to tap into younger voices and have the young lead the change. It cannot be more truer in a region like MENA. In a sense, I'll give you a very, this actually happened. So when we were running the focus groups before we launched the show, we actually had facilitators obviously running the focus groups for separate groups of men and women, obviously showed a few episodes. And at one point in time, the facilitator for the men's group was an older gentleman. And we showed him obviously the videos. We were discussing how we run the facilitation. And he came back and he said, I'm not really sure I'm comfortable running this. So this is just a sample that is backed by a lot of research on our side that we know it is going to be harder for us in the region to change attitudes, particularly with older generations that are very much set or more attached to a certain way of thinking. And we know that this is not just for gender, this is across the board. But we know that the change is happening with the younger generation. So that is kind of innovation and go young. And my third point was about bringing it mainstream. One of our major aims at Womanity is how can we create content that is exciting, that is consumable, that is fresh, that is young, that is appealing, that is entertaining, that is engaging. And the reason why we want to do this is because we want to have mainstream pick it. We know that what we are doing and what some, very few others are doing specifically in MENA is just drip efforts. But if we actually innovate and are able to stay ahead of the curve in terms of content that is consumable, at the end of the day, mainstream will pick it if it's viewed. Mainstream will pick it if it engages, generates discussions. And we know for a fact that on our very small platform, over 10 episodes, we hit 25 million viewers in MENA. So we're like, okay, great. We take this now and we're pitching the next thing, and we're pitching it for mainstream. They kind of backed out to start off with because this was too much, and too much coming from a young girl. But now we have viewership, and now we have not only viewership, we got 2 million engagements, comments, shares, discussions. We had screening parties, basically people taking the video, having a screening party live, engaging in discussion. We had men engaged, so it shocked us the amount of comments that came from men, both pro and against, and discussing things. And what even actually surprised us very much is that there was no, we didn't get any threats. So we were like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. But there were no threats. There were a lot of people that disagreed, but there was no hate speech. There was no, and that's where we know that we managed to get the format right. We infused comedy. We used it with a young, a young Maria that we built up in a character where she doesn't necessarily come across too threatening. She's brainy. She knows her stuff. She's funny. And actually, a lot of the people, when we showed the focus group, said, if Maria was in a party, I'd love to have a discussion with her, even if I disagreed with her. And we're like, that's it. That's what we want to get to. And because that will get us mainstream, that will take us out from the formula of dripped content to more mass content that can actually help us shift the dynamics.
So can I follow up from that? Because Valentina's asked a really excellent question in the chat box about the role of men and boys as allies in the program. So Sharon mentioned, that there's been a huge uptake by men in the villages where they're working. You've mentioned this idea that men are participating, that they are listeners, that they are supporters. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how you engage men and boys as allies? Should we start with you, Heidi? How are you engaging men and boys as allies?
Sure. So something that we piloted this year, we established a program called Walk It Like I Talk It, and we made a partnership with the Interfraternity Council at the University of Southern California. So this is a very small program that we were just sort of feeling out to see how it would work. And we work with a partner. She started something called the Real Talk program, and we basically take ideas. We have a conversation about toxic masculinity with fraternity boys, fraternity brothers, and about to address sexual assault on campuses and male-female relations on campuses. And what we find that when we're going into the lair of the boys, if you will, because really each frat house we found out is sort of like its own culture, its own tribe, that when they are comfortable to talk about these things that make them uncomfortable, or to really talk about how they do behave toward women in ways that are not beneficial to either them in their dating lives or to the young women in their, for their health and safety, that there's a willingness to reflect and to change behavior. But it's always we find that we can't really only do this with women facilitators. We have to include men to set examples. And so in all of our work, we are finding increasingly it's more and more important that the most effective media, the most effective conversations that will center around a film or anything else that we're doing, it has to be in partnership with men for obvious reasons.
Right.
But absolutely, like the real change won't happen if we're only talking to half the population. And yet I do want to emphasize that the half of the population, the women and girls, it's really important to have those conversations among ourselves too, especially when we find out that there's something like still 90% of the world actually holds gender-based stereotypes that are limiting women and girls. So as important as it is to build the male allies, it's still important to build allyship among women and girls. Like it's upsetting to me, but it's just the truth. It's absolutely, because it is just so ingrained in us to sort of accept our stations in life that are limiting and harmful. So we need to have those conversations among ourselves still. Maybe more than, I would be of the opinion even more than with the men at this point in time, because I think we can have better conversations when we feel more secure about our own empowerment and rights to equality.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask two of you, Sharon and Rana, the same question, because there's another great question from Helen about algorithms. And I'm currently writing a grant about algorithms. So I'm so glad there's a question, because I'm going to take notes. So we know that algorithms are essentially totally biased from a sexist and racist point of view, that they're already built into social media platforms. And so Helen's great question is, how do we as users and advocates, so I'm asking you as advocates and in your organizational situation, how do you ensure that the messages, for example, from Maria, Rana, are not somehow manipulated or, I don't know, like pushed to the bottom when you do the use? How are you, it's another security question in some ways, isn't it? But how are you helping her or ensuring that those messages aren't limited or controlled by, you know, the algorithms that really make a determination about what we see?
So one of the first things actually, and that's a great question, one of the first things we started looking at once we got production up and running and kind of, you know, we were going on with that process, our next, actually almost in parallel, we were already at the distribution phase. So how do we make sure from a distribution perspective this works? So we did kind of a more than one approach. One was actually getting in touch with the regional offices, you know, obviously given that these are, you know, conveniently mostly Dubai based, which was great. So the Facebooks, the Twitters, Instagram, Snapchat, we spoke to all of them. And we spoke to all of them primarily to two main, I guess, you know, the media partnerships team, in addition to their usually head of, you know, CSR, you know, pushing projects, you know, forward, so that we are able to discuss, you know, with them, what is the best way for us to ensure maximum reach? How do we get out of these traps of getting, you know, kind of the messages pushed? How do we get to organic reach more than, you know, we were very conscious that we also wanted to invest a very, very small amount into, you know, boosting and advertising so that we're able to actually reach, you know, our kind of bullseye's audience. So a lot of these discussions actually were very fruitful in the sense that we managed to get our social media team that was kind of making, you know, taking care of distribution on specific training sessions with, you know, kind of the different platforms, so they can work their way around the different algorithms and the best way to boost it, you know, the best time, and so on and so forth. So I think from that perspective, we at least try to kind of manage that by managing the distribution effort. But what we also did is that we tied up with influencers. So we have obviously, you know, as you know, influencers on, you know, kind of on Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok, and we tied up with very big ones that were, and the way that we did it is that we asked each influencer to pick a topic out of the 10 that they would like to address. And again, to go back to the boys and men, you know, our show was a total of 10 episodes. We had 4 male co-hosts. In 4 of them, we wanted to make sure that our influencer also kind of reflect the same. So we had 7, you know, kind of women influencers, 3 men influencers, and I'm talking influencers with massive reach on Instagram in the region, massive followership. And so we had the influencers create their own content. So it's not just a matter of sharing. So we actually engaged them in the process of creating content on the same topic. So we had an Emirati woman, you know, from the UAE create her own content about periods, which was fascinating to us because she picked it. And we're like, really, you want to talk about that? I mean, are you sure you want to talk about that? And she's like, yeah, I'd love to. And I want to frame it in a way where I'm going to talk about my little girl and what was my own experience growing up as a little girl and learning about periods and how negative it was. And I was terrified of it, and how I'm trying to change that, and how I'm trying to break the cycle. That was her content. We had a Saudi, a hugely kind of followed Saudi, you know, woman that chose to talk about sex education. And again, we were like, are you sure? Like, why are you all picking these? Do you want to like take employment? You know, they're like, no, we want to do that. So we were extremely like, you know, surprised, but well supported by having as well influencers push through these algorithms as well, because they have huge followerships and their content gets snapped. So overnight, you would get the influencer content going, and we would grow with another 10,000 followers on our Facebook and YouTube pages. So we employed a few strategies to be able to get around some of these issues.
We've got one more question in the chat, and we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to ask it because all three of you have actually talked about how you work in cooperation with mainstream media in different ways. So Sharon's program has actually developed out of a UN media program, and I know it's also of interest to the Department of Education and, you know, grown like that. And Rana, you've talked about how, you know, you've had pickup, and Heidi also from mainstream media. So do you want to talk about what are the challenges, Heidi, of working with mainstream media, and what are the benefits?
So I would say I can just talk about a challenge in women's voices now that we haven't overcome yet, and that we're hoping to work toward, is that we receive hundreds of incredible films every year for our film festival. These are important stories that need to be told, and they need to be heard by more people. And really, it's a matter of getting them into mainstream media channels. And so we're trying to create pipelines where we can connect, where our film festival basically be a way for media representatives to see stories, films that they wouldn't necessarily see, they wouldn't pick up through other channels, because we have filmmakers from all over the world that really don't have access to, let's say, the Hollywood industry, the media industry. And so how can we connect our filmmakers from Iran, from Afghanistan, from India, from Kazakhstan, with someone in Hollywood who sees maybe their documentary and says that's an important story that we can adapt into a different kind of screenplay? That's the direction we would like to go in. I think we see some of that. You know, we have seen some of that. A lot of films, I think, have found their way from Pakistan, from India, usually about honor violence, things like this. But there's more stories than just honor violence that can come out of these parts of the world. So how do we connect the people? It's something we're still trying to figure out, because it would really diversify our media consumption, our representation of women and girls, and really connect us better on these issues.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to give you each 1 minute. If you had to give me one sentence about what's the most powerful message that you want to give about the importance of media and the voice of women and girls in media, what would that one thing be? Do you need a moment, or are you, Sharon knows, I knew you'd know.
Information changes lives.
Yeah.
Our main two metrics are audience appreciation and broadcast reach. And so we study audience appreciation quite a bit. And we have so many testimonials, and we understand who our listeners are. We know that to live a long and healthy life as a woman in Sierra Leone and Democratic Republic of Congo is very difficult. And if you don't know about your rights and you don't know about services that you can use, it really is an enormous disadvantage. And I think information changes lives, but also as a feminist, movements change lives. And these countries have very fledgling women's movements. And I think media is out there for us to use to be able to connect women in meaningful ways.
Thanks. Heidi.
Okay, I would say that media is one of the most, film specifically, is one of the most accessible tools for us all to take on the responsibility that I personally feel that we all have to make the world a better place, that it's in our capacity to make positive social change, and we have the power and the resources to do it no matter where we are. And sometimes it's just about being given information that you didn't have before, and learning from it and then acting upon it. So some similarity with Sharon for sure.
Rana.
Sure, I'll actually just say a couple of very short sentences in Arabic, and I will give you the context of why I will use that. So the first one is as-sawt thawra, and the second one is as-sawt awra. So you will notice that actually both rhyme, but there are different words at the end. So as-sawt thawra and as-sawt awra. And I'll give you the explanation of both. The first one is الصوت ثورة, voice is revolution. And the second one is الصوت عورة, voice is a shame. But it is a particularly used term in the Middle East to shame women's voices. So they say صوت المرأة عورة, the voice of woman is a shame. But we changed that, and it was when Ala Salah came out and stood on top of the car and kind of spoke out, and we had these huge posters that said الصوت عورة, scratch that, الصوت ثورة, the voice is a revolution. And for me, that small sentence, the change of that last word from عورة to ثورة, from shame to revolution, really says it all to me in terms of what media does, specifically in a place like MENA.
Wonderful way to end. Voice is revolution, and that's what we're here for. We're here for the revolution. So thank you so much, Rana. I'm not going to do a long wrap up. I just really want to say thank you all very much. And one thing I've really taken from this is all of you talked about power, about how we access power, how we use power, the importance of power in our lives. And so next year when we do an update of this panel, because by then there'll be so many new forms of communication that my children will have to teach me about, we're going to call it The Power of Media to Change the Lives of Women and Girls Whose Voice is the Revolution. Because I don't think we're vulnerable. I think actually women and girls are at risk precisely because of our capacities and our power, and because the patriarchy needs to control those capacities and control that power. And this is a brilliant tool, media, and all of the examples that you've given of precisely that. We are the power. Those women in Sierra Leone on the ground who are youth activists, those women in Bangladesh making films about taboo subjects like acid burning, the woman in UAE making YouTube content on periods. This is us women stepping into our power and using technology to advance rights and to bring about equality and change that all of us long to see. And so thank you all so much. That was a really exciting opportunity for me personally to learn about Voices Revolution, which will go up on my wall, and to learn about the power of women and young women, especially when they're able to take hold of their voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Atalanti, do I hand it to you?
No, to Noemi. I just want to say there is a list of thank yous on the chat to all of you for this amazing discussion. But I pass it on to Noemi to close the evening. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, thank you very much, ladies, for this interesting and inspiring conversation. Especially thank you, Katarina, for leading this discussion, and thank you, Rana, Heidi, Sharon, for sharing your views, knowledge, and experiences. It was extremely informative and uplifting. I have really nothing to add. I'm sure that, as you said, Katarina, this discussion will not stop at this point, but it will continue further between philanthropic organizations and hopefully also with media companies. To close this event, let me make an announcement on behalf of Giving Women about our upcoming events. We are pleased to invite you to our annual conference on the topic of women and nutrition. The conference will take place online as part of the new standard between the 26th and the 29th of October. For the first 3 pre-conference days, we organize evening programs with panel discussions and film screenings. And the whole day conference is on the 29th of October with experts, civil society, and corporate leaders from different geographies. So as said, the focus of the conference is women and nutrition. We will look at the root causes of malnutrition and talk about different programs that can provide sustainable solutions. We would like us all to remember on the key role women play in securing food and nutrition for everybody in their family and also in the broader community. the topic is even more urgent or burning in the light of the current pandemic. So again, the annual conference is between the 26th and the 29th of October. Kathleen will add the link to the conference to the chat box. So please check it out. We very much look forward to seeing many of you there. And finally, if you feel inspired after this stimulating panel discussion to be part of our community and support women-focused organization or project with your knowledge and experiences, then please join us, be a member of Giving Women. You can learn more about the membership benefits by going to the link in the chat box. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, and have a nice evening, everybody. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you all. You can unmute yourselves. I can't unmute you to clap for everybody.